So, folks, you would have heard me running around the internet talking about a 25-minute documentary called ACTionism. And today on the show is Ellie Meredith, who is the ACTionism film tells her story of leaving school and getting involved in ACTionism and Reaction Collective and her journey of finding the others and climate change and everything like that. And the point of this whole film I'm ranting on about is we are inviting co-working spaces to do a screening in the co-working space and then have a discussion afterwards. And I've done a lot of this type of stuff over the years, and one of the best things you can do is get a group of like-minded people in your co-working space. They can be members and they can be from your wider community, and to watch the thing and then have an intentional discussion afterwards about what came out of it, and that will have a great knock-on effect for your co-working space and your local community. It's a great way of inviting people into your space that wouldn't normally come in and even understand probably what a co-working space is. So if you are heavily invested in your local community and your members and finding the others, this is an episode to pay attention to. There's links in the show notes on how to host a screening, and we're going to be talking about it all the way through. So let's get into the show. Hello, folks, and welcome to the most important, no pressure here, edition ever of the Co-working Values podcast. And in the studio is the Ellie Meredith. What are you known for, Ellie, and what would you like to be known for?
Hello. So I'm Ellie, co-director of Reaction Collective, and a film was made about my story called ACTionism, and it kind of retraces my journey from leaving school and feeling anxious about climate change, and then kind of finding my people and taking collective action. And I'd like to be known for being a nice human, I think, and just generally being.
You're doing okay so far. I think people see you as a nice human. How long did that? Because you said finding your people there, so you left school and then you found your people. Do you know how much of a life fluke that is?
Pretty quick turnaround.
It is. What? So seriously, what? I don't mean like Gavin and Heather, but who are your people, and did you even know what you were looking for until you found them?
I mean, Gavin and Heather are definitely my people as well, but I think I was looking for people that, I think at that point I was feeling quite lost at sea and fairly lonely. I really struggled to relate to people at school because I did the kind of conversations that I was kind of hoping to be able to have with my friends were about the things that were going on outside the school gates, and I wasn't able to have many of those conversations in school, about climate change and all the rest of it that was kind of whizzing around in my head at that time. But what I love about, finding the collective, and it's kind of given me permission to kind of imagine another way of doing things, and that it really has kind of felt like a real kind of homecoming and kind of a remembering of what really kind of matters in this moment. And it's also kind of made me feel like I can do stuff in a different way as well. Since being with them, I've done all sorts of bonkers things, made the film for one, climbed mountains, learned how to do things I never thought I'd be able to do, and I can do that because I've got a crew by my side who kind of show me that doing things.
Oh, I love it. I've got a crew by my side. I love that feeling. It took me 25 years to find that, And so with the folks, we are going to get to why you should watch an ACTionism film, but I've just gone on this little, tangent here. When did you first start getting interested / obsessed, worried about the whole climate thing? And then when you say climate, what is that? Because that's like talking about food, I got really worried about food, but actually it could be cheeseburgers.
Yeah, I think for me, so for about 5 years or so, I've been volunteering with Shropshire Wildlife Trust, and I work there now. But when I was still at school, I was doing that volunteering on the weekends, and we get a lot of flooding in Shropshire. And so a lot of the work that we were doing was kind of around flood prevention, and you kind of see the aftermath of all of those floodings, and you see it happening more and more and more. And the more that you kind of learn from the land, the more you kind of realise how kind of fucked with it, we are kind of locally in terms of nature collapse. So for me, it always comes back to nature and my love of being outside, and the more time that I spend outside, the more you kind of realise that you're a part of nature, and you kind of, I've always felt things deeper than other people, so I've always been quite a deeply sensitive person, and when I kind of see the literal collapse on my doorstep, that's quite overwhelming. So yeah, from that perspective, yeah, it was certainly the kind of nature side of the climate crisis that kind of, you know, makes me feel most concerned about things. And I've forgotten the other bit of your question.
So have I. When you say climate, is it? I think this is it. If you're paying attention, folks, sorry about this, but when you say climate, is that like, is it just the fields in Shropshire climate, or is it everything to do like recycling and all that other climate affecting stuff?
I think it starts at home, because that's where I kind of feel the effects of it kind of more immediately. And then I think when I was starting to look kind of out on the world at maybe like, you know, 13 or 14 and going, oh shit, everything is not working. And it's a really kind of strange inheritance to kind of be born into a time where it feels like nothing's working anymore, and the old systems and the old stories are kind of coming to a collapse, and yet they still keep rearing their head all of the time. So yeah, and I think when you kind of start to look out on that collapse happening all around you, and that is very overwhelming, and also to be kind of faced with the fact that no one cares probably as much as you do in your classroom. But then I think, you know, from my perspective, like, you know, I was a scout for 14 years, and I kind of, the outdoors was very much open to me and accessible, and one of the main things I care about most right now is kind of how do we open up the outdoors, how do we keep kit in action for longer, and that's kind of a lot of the work that Reaction is doing. From that perspective, which is really amazing to kind of get to be involved with some of that and learn from our members and that are doing that work on the ground, which is really great. And I still work for Shropshire Wildlife Trust, and that's amazing, and it's really good fun getting to kind of do that within my week. But yeah, certainly kind of grassroots kind of community action for me is certainly where it's at, and I think Actionism in lots of ways have got that kind of sneaky power that kind of can bring more people into the story, and yeah, I think it's cool.
I like the sneaky power. Do you think, like, because I'm a neurodivergent. Like
Same, buddy.
I've come to understand. Sounds so significant talking like this, but I would get really upset at things, and it's
Yeah.
only since, you know, I've like learned more about my ADHD and everything like that. Like I'd get, I know, this. If I have to throw a bit of chocolate down the sink, it's like a family member dying. And do you think that neurodiversity exacerbates the feeling of horror when you see a flood or something? You know,
Yeah.
I'm saying that as a bit of a joke, but I'm being very serious at the same time.
Yeah, I definitely feel things a lot more kind of deeply than other people, and my senses around it are very much heightened, and I don't really know where to put any of that energy unless it's part of, you know, collective action, and part of, you know, the work that we're kind of doing with Reaction and Actionism. But yeah, I definitely feel things on a deeper kind of frequency to others, and that has always been quite difficult to kind of try and find an outlet that I can pour any of that energy into. But I feel like I'm kind of starting to find that now, and that's been really great. And kind of 2 years into the work that I've been doing with Reaction, it kind of feels like that's my kind of place to go and put some of that. And also, what's quite funny about the people that I kind of surround myself with these days is most of them are friends that I've made through Reaction, and a lot of my crew now, you know, are neurodivergent, and I really love that. And it's kind of funny to kind of see the sort of work that neurodivergent people flock to is generally quite big kind of undertakings in terms of like systems change and you know, the big kind of things that Reaction are trying to do in the world. So yeah, it's quietly reassuring to know that my energy is kind of going in the right places, because it feels good. And I think that's the great thing about Reactions, because I've kind of stumbled across it in the way that I have, and it feels great, and I feel like that's somewhere that I want to be, you know, putting as much energy that I can at the moment. But yeah, you're right, like being neurodivergent certainly adds another level of complexity to the kind of read that I have on the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've been guests on this podcast who are like swimming upstream and are somewhere on that spectrum. And you know, I've definitely found everything you just said. I've definitely found that as well. So let's get to. I have to pull myself back in here, folks. So let's get to the actions in film, because basically we're on a mission to communicate. Not, I mean, I want to say make people show the film, but that's definitely not the energy we're going for, isn't it? But the getting people together in a co-working space, doing a screening and having a chat afterwards is a, I know, a really good way of instigating conversations. So what can you like walk us through an actionism screening? I keep saying that screening,
Yeah.
folks, screening, an actionism screening, and there's a
Yeah.
link in the show notes to this, folks.
Yeah, so the way that kind of actionism's made its way in the world is through community screenings. So it's not touring cinemas, and it's kind of, well, it's also not on any streaming platform. So it's the story is moving through people, and in the form of community screenings. So right now, hundreds of screenings are being planned all over the world. In living rooms, pubs, libraries, kind of anywhere where people gather and kind of be together in a co-working space is a perfect place to kind of do that. And ultimately, it's just kind of about creating spaces for people to kind of show up and see what might begin from their kind of communities. And it's just a really nice way to get people together, basically, in the same way that, you know, co-working is a great way to kind of collaborate in a different kind of way to, you know, working in a more kind of different kind of office setting. But I guess, like, at its heart, like, a community screening isn't just about kind of watching a film. It's just about being together kind of in a shared space with kind of open hearts and kind of curious minds to kind of see where, you know, those connections and those kind of questionings and, you know, feelings might start to move towards something, you know, and people might find a bit of an outlet for some of that stuff that they were kind of holding on their own, but they want to kind of raise their hand and say, oh, who else cares about this sort of stuff? But yeah, it's kind of just like a conversation starter, if you like it's just sort of a bit of an offering for kind of upside down times that people might be up for kind of getting behind and having slightly different conversations. But to be like, it's very simple to host a screening. So all you have to do is put a request in on our website. We send you a guide that I've written about how to host a screening in your community. And we kind of operate on like a pay as you feel kind of basis where you just chip in whatever feels right for you. We recommend like about £100 because Reaction doesn't really have much money. So to kind of keep the magic going for us, we need a bit of money to kind of support some of that. But yeah, and then you can host it wherever you like, with whoever you like, and the kind of conversations that spark after you've sat down and watched the film for 20 minutes. You know, some of the screens that I've been to have been really incredible, and people have kind of dreamed into what they want their, you know, community to feel like, and you kind of harvest some of those ideas in the room all together, and then you start to take collective action, which is, yeah, really powerful to watch in real time.
How do you get, because I've done this loads of times. I'll show something and then I'm much cooler than this now, but like I'll show something and I'll go, there'll be like 25 people in front of me and I say, so any questions? And then like there's tumbleweed. Like, is there a way to set it up, or like what have you seen other people do when you've been to screenings where they've kind of avoided that, you know, awkwardness in the room? And because you have to kind of pull things out of people.
Yeah. I think there will always be that kind of strange awkwardness because it's quite difficult to sometimes face into what could be, because we're not often asked, you know, to use our imaginations or our creativity to kind of reimagine, you know, the whole kind of thing in terms of, you know, how our community could kind of exist together and make ideas happen. But one really cool thing that kind of sparked this whole thing for us is an organisation down in Cornwall called 99p Films. And they're a CIC, and their kind of whole idea is to use films as a way to bring people together, but in a slightly different way. So kind of how they set it up is you have a film, no, you have like a communal feast all together, which was super tasty. I've been to 2 of those film nights now, and they're really great. And then before the film kind of goes on, you have like a mindful breathing session where you just do a bit of breathing exercise to kind of bring everyone back into the room. And then the film goes on, and sometimes they play another couple of films just afterwards to kind of set the tone for the evening and expand the conversation beyond, you know, the film that they're presenting on the night. So for the one that I went to, when we did the actionism screening, they did another film about mending and kind of repair, and it was like an animation that was kind of a completely different style to our film, and it kind of brought the story kind of together in a different way, which was really great. And then after that we have, well, they had, and most screenings will have like a bit of a Q&A time, but that screening, what they did was they got us all to sit around in a big circle, so myself included in that, and Mike, the guy who was with me who made the film. We were just kind of sat in the discussion circle in the same way that everyone else was. So it meant that, you know, it wasn't one person answering a question, it was the whole room kind of having a bit more of an alive conversation. And what was really nice was that everyone, it felt easier for everyone to kind of participate in that conversation, because maybe the person next to you starts talking first, and then you get a bit of confidence to say, oh yeah, I agree with you about X, Y, and Z, or this is how I feel. And yeah, it was a really nice kind of way to kind of set the conversation, set the tone in a way that was, not quite as intimidating as one person stood at the front and everyone having to come up with questions for them, because, you know, sometimes it can be a bit of a tumbleweed, which is,
I know.
okay.
I like circles. I never.
Circles are great.
There's a guy, Peter Block, who's on this podcast, and he's like, where I got my obsession with arranging runes in semicircles and amphitheaters and circles and stuff. So never in those chairs.
Yeah, it just feels more friendly, doesn't it?
The what was it? So what I would hope is that people would show this film and then something would happen afterwards. And I don't want to like prescribe to people what they should do after they've shown the film, but like what have you seen other people do as a result of this? And you did say earlier on that like everyone does something different, which is
Yeah.
exactly what I hoped would happen.
Yeah. So kind of in the guide that I've pulled together, I've kind of come up with a couple of different kind of ideas that kind of feel a little bit reactiony, and kind of the way that people might want to gather their community together in a kind of slightly different way than doing a community like a Q&A at the end, because it's just an easier way to kind of literally get involved with the action as you're there. So some people have done like this like a dreaming activity where you go like, wouldn't it be wonderful if, let's say, Winchester did this in our community, and then a load of people just stack a load of post-it notes of ideas of things that could happen, and then you kind of sit together in the room and figure out how you could make that happen in your own community, which is like a really nice idea to kind of spark kind of that shift from being someone that passively watches a film to a kind of an active kind of participant in the movement, if you like, of actionism and kind of that way of showing up in the world. But yeah, some other ideas that have happened. So there was a screening in the Highlands that Mike went along to, and he did like a repair workshop there. So I think they teamed up with a local repair cafe, and people brought in a bunch of stuff, like clothes or bikes or kind of electronics, um, and they just kind of got to mending and kind of sharing skills with each other, and that's kind of a really nice way to sort of resist that throwaway culture that we talk about in the film, but literally to do that there and then with your hands and kind of engage with your community in a different way. And then loads of other things like kind of practical stuff like darning or embroidery, or like visible mending, and kind of things that you can do with your hands. And it's also a really nice way to kind of start a conversation with someone that you don't know, because you're not like talking face to face with them, and it feels like an easier kind of interaction to have because you're kind of doing something at the same time with someone else and you're learning those skills as you go. And then kind of outside of like traditional kind of Q&A style things, again, like I really love it when people kind of bring in like art supplies and stuff, and kind of people respond in more of like a visual way, collaging or drawing, or just like some sort of creative kind of way of responding to the film that kind of opens it out a bit more into the ways that kind of words can't always reach people in that sense. Sometimes it's nicer kind of those ideas to brew in kind of form of creativity and stepping into some of that.
That
But yeah.
that arc thing we had for a long time in a co-working space in Euston. Me and Phil ran a thing called Art Club every week,
Oh, nice.
and people we just had some crayons to begin with, and then people would bring in like lino cutting, and gradually it grew. But sitting
wow.
around the table, the amount of people that just don't do any art because it's never in front of them, and then when they sit in front of a table, they go, "The last time I did this, I was at school, and I'm like 45 now."
Yeah.
It's a really good way of getting people. I don't know. I'm going to say in the mood. I want to ask you, because I meant to ask this earlier. Like, how on earth, Ellie Meredith, did you find yourself in a film? Like, how did that come about?
So I kind of just after I kind of emailed Jon and had read the book that he'd wrote about citizening, I'd been working with Reaction after he'd kind of introduced me to them, as he does in the film, for about 4 months or so. And then around my birthday, 5th of January, get it in your diaries, people, Gav called me up, who's one of the other kind of co-directors of Reaction. Didn't know it was my birthday, and he was like, "Oh, I'm in the pub with this guy Mike, who's a filmmaker, and we've been thinking about maybe making a film about your story." Because he was like, it's really cool to kind of hear what the kind of journey that you've been on at kind of such a young age, and how you've kind of got really involved with the work that we're doing at Reaction. And he was like, "I'd love to kind of retrace some of that." And share your story in a different kind of way, because at that time they'd managed to get some funding from an organisation called Hotel Plan, which was kind of really unrestricted in spirit, and they were like, oh, here's a bunch of money that you can kind of put towards whatever you feel would be a great way of kind of sharing your story, or a project that you're kind of keen to do. And that felt like a really great kind of opportunity to make a film. And then we kind of went from there. But like when Gav called me up about it, I was like, I really trust Gav, and I was like, look, I know that you've got me, like, if and I know that we can kind of figure this out together, because I've never done anything like this before in my life. And the whole film felt quite intimidating when we were kind of talking about the kind of adventures that I'd be going on, and I'd be going to France, like meeting all these random people that I haven't met yet. So it did feel like a big undertaking, but I think by that time I did feel like I kind of had a bit of a crew around me, and that felt like an easier thing to do with them, as opposed to kind of on my own. So yeah, and I'm also kind of up for a bit of a challenge, so that felt like a pretty big one to kind of get myself involved with. But yeah, I'm really glad to do it. It was good fun, and now I get to go to screenings.
Only give away as much as you want to, but like what? So Jon asked you 2 questions that kicked all this off. So yeah. Can you talk about that bit? Because you were like, dear Jon, I'm devastated about climate change, but
yeah. So to kind of just take it back a step, I guess. I can't really remember. So Jon wrote a book about citizening, and I kind of don't really remember like what prompted me to pick the book up in the bookshop. But I think part of it was kind of a bit of a sense that I needed to find some sort of descriptors for the tension and unease that I was kind of feeling inside. But like the impact of it was massive, and it really cracked something open for me, and it gave form to feelings in the same way that I think it did for you, Bernie. That I kind of hadn't yet found the words for. And then I emailed Jon the week after I left school, which I've never emailed an author before to tell them how much I love their book, but I did for Jon, because it felt like something that, and also I think in the book it's a kind of series of stories about very ordinary people doing pretty extraordinary things. So I kind of wanted to remind him that he's a pretty, extraordinary human for, telling those stories in the way that he did. And he replied on my very last day of school, which felt really fitting. And and I wasn't really expecting anything back from him, or any kind of reply other than a nice thumbs up or something. But yeah, I was just really surprised and grateful that he wrote back to me. But yeah, I kind of just wanted to say thank you, and that kind of the book shifted something in me. And then he emailed back to say, oh, why don't we meet up in London? And I was like, okay. So he invited me down to visit him and kind of spend the day together. And I wasn't really sure what to expect. I kind of thought that he was going to just kind of ask me kind of what I thought about the book, and then maybe talk through some of the things that he outlines in the book about the different ways to kind of show up for things that you care about. But actually, he just, because I kind of said in the email, I'm feeling a bit lost and I'm not really sure what to do. I'd like to do some of the similar things to the people in your book, kind of take action with people in my own community. And we sat down together, and he asked 2 quite disarming questions at that time, which were, what gives you joy, and kind of where do those things that bring you joy meet the work that he's doing in the world? And my response was basically, I love being outside. I do a bunch of stuff for Shropshire Wildlife Trust at weekends, but I kind of want to do a bit more stuff with other people, and get more involved with my own community, and do a bit of kind of collective action stuff like the people in your book. And he then made that connection between me and Reaction, because he kind of came across them as he was writing the book. And when the book first came out, he did this thing on his newsletter to say, invite me and I will come and see and visit your spaces. And Gav and Heather replied to that email that he sent in his newsletter to be like, oh yeah, we've got this space in the French Alps called One Tree at a Time, and we'd love for you to come and visit. And so they kind of got to know each other a bit steadily through all of that kind of work. But yeah, it was great, because Jon managed to make that connection that I really kind of needed to make at that point in my life, and that was 2 years ago now.
It's amazing how all these little citizen threads are all intertwined. Like that, every week I find someone else from my universe, either directly or indirectly connected to it. Last thing to like wrap up on is when I've got a. What was your main takeaway from that night of the Conduit? There's all those people in the room, and those 2 people, Jon and Caroline. I all I remember from that whole thing was porridge. But
porridge.
Eat porridge.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I mean, going into it, I did feel very intimidated. I mean, I've done some speaky things with Jon before, a bit of public waffling at different community screenings and stuff, but that night did feel very different with Caroline there, and it did feel like a big treat, you know, because she's always been such a huge inspiration for me, and you know, sitting beside her and Jon was a bit bonkers. But I think kind of the work that both Caroline and I are doing kind of signifies that although the big questions around, you know, how do we save democracy and, you know, clean up the planet and take collective action, is actually how simple and human the answers might need to be to those questions. And Jon on the night did a really, as he always does, did a really great job of kind of listening to what me and Caroline are really saying and kind of linking it up to each other, and how simple it is actually in terms of, like, you know, it's really just about being a human and, you know, the joyfulness of taking action and, you know, imagination and creativity, and how we don't really have to have the answers, and so much of the magic can kind of be found in the unknown. And yeah, like I think I did feel quite stretched and also a little bit steadied in kind of knowing that what reaction is doing is actually bigger than maybe it seems to feel like it is, you know, from the day to day, because, you know, in lots of ways we are kind of reimagining both how kind of the outdoor sports industry works, but also we're doing a lot of unlearning ourselves and kind of learning different ways to kind of be in these times. So yeah, I mean, it felt like a kind of big night. I'm still trying to get my head around it really, but yeah, it did feel quite powerful and a bit of a bonkers full circle moment, because it was very cool to kind of sit there with Jon and do that with him, but also have Caroline there to kind of bounce ideas around. And yeah, and she in a weird way kind of elevated our message in a way to make it kind of bigger than it feels that it is, which was really nice. And they both kind of held me in that conversation in a really lovely way as well. So it felt.
I loved all the bit about the whole story bit that came out of it about telling better stories, and I've heard that in different places before, but I think that like you said there, we don't have to have all the answers. I always think I have to have all the answers, and no matter how many times people tell me that you don't need to have all the answers, I'm still like, I need to have all the answers.
Would be helpful.
And actually, everyone who doesn't have all the answers and sort of introduces an idea is the people I pay the most attention to.
Yeah, same.
So that was interesting. And then one of the things that I just that whole find the others thing is really, I know that's the frequency I've been looking for, and like, is that? You don't have to say yes, because I feel like I'm putting you on the spot. Does the find the others think is that nourishing for you?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think in the same way that Jon would say that once you kind of lift the lid on the citizen story and you kind of see how much citizen action is happening everywhere and all at once, I definitely kind of feel that, certainly through, you know, going to lots of different community film screenings and doing things with reaction, is I'm constantly kind of collecting people that don't necessarily think the same as me, but kind of want to show up for the planet maybe in a similar way that I do, because we don't agree with each other all the time about everything, otherwise we'd definitely be a bit of a cult. But we're kind of very happy to kind of sit in that kind of uncertainty, and I do think I have definitely found the others, and I'm just finding more of them as I kind of go through doing lots of different things all the time in terms of, you know, workshops or film screenings or whatever else I kind of get myself involved with. But no, it's been really wholesome and yeah, really grounding in a way. And I do definitely feel kind of rerouted now that I've found them, because it feels like I can do stuff in my own way that I maybe didn't feel I could before.
I'm very happy for you. Where can people find you online, Ellie? Where's the best place to keep track of your story?
Listen to the story. Probably LinkedIn, I'm guessing, and then maybe a bit of Instagram-y stuff, although I don't really do much on there. But yeah, definitely LinkedIn would be cool. And then obviously Reaction's website and socials and all that good stuff. We will
put a link to everything in the show notes about that.
Thank you.
So the little list here, folks, to wrap it up with. There's a link. I'll put a link to my podcast with Jon Alexander and Tony Bacigalupi's podcast, and also Gavin in the show notes. Urban MBA are going to be one of the first people in our little London co-working assembly ecosystem showing the Actionism film. There's a link to host a screening, and I don't exactly know which ones they are yet, but there's at least 10 co-working spaces that have committed to showing a Actionism screening. I keep doing that.
Screening.
screaming. And there's at some stage we're going to post the trailer to Actionism in the LinkedIn co-working group, and we can start a conversation under that. And if you're hosting screenings, share everything there. And then coming up in February, we'll be in London at the Workspace Design Show, which is the last week of February. And also there is, I can't remember the name of my own event now, Unreasonable Connection, all about being connected, folks. Unreasonable Connection, we're doing a one-day event at a secret London location, which are going to be 150 co-working space owners, action takers, impact, just regular human beings that run co-working spaces and are interested in citizenship and the local community and everything we talked about with Ellie here today. Say goodbye, Ellie.
Bye. Thank you, Bernie.
Cheers, folks.
Thanks, everybody.
Wherever you are in the world, be careful out there. It is a jungle.